Welcome to Between Two Thorns and in front of many palms. My two guests here tonight, Andrew Dobinson, MD, and Hamid Malik, PG.
Andrew Dobinson, MBBS.
Oh, MBBS.
Yes, I'm not fancy like an MD.
It's Hamid Malik, PG5.
Yeah. Two very accomplished para-waiters here with us tonight to talk a little bit about an incident involving Neynens in Europe. So I'll let Andrew start off, just explain a little bit about his trip over there and the arrival.
So we'd had quite ambitious plans for me for a holiday where I'd sort of managed to secure nearly a month off to go to Europe on my own without the kids to go flying. And I guess the rough plan was that I was going to go to the northern French Alps in Annecy and meet Hamid. Nick had been sort of making his way up from Digne, where his gliding club is in the south of France. He'd taken a couple of days to Volbiv, basically up to meet us around Annecy, and Hamid had been working hard on his paragliding in Annecy, and I'd just flown in from Australia. Eventually we all sort of basically met up on launch at Le Fouclair late in the afternoon. Initially we'd planned to just go and have a quick local flight because I'm pretty fatigued, and just probably land somewhere on Tournette and camp out the night. But yeah, Nick sort of said, well, once you're on Tournette, it's just one or two extra glides over to the Aravis. So we kind of figured that, yeah, okay, that's probably a pretty good goal for the day.
So Dobbo and Lucas arrived this morning, and that's Dobbo there now, and Hamid, he's been here for a while. Lucas is going to fly local, it's his first flight in Europe. And yeah, the idea is to bivvy tonight. We're hoping to go to the Aravis. Great to have them come and join me. This is awesome. Hamid's seen us, he's come back. Don't think he's heard me, because I asked him to turn left slightly if he heard me on Zello. Dobbo, and soon we're going to head over to camp. Oh, this is epic.
That was such a beautiful morning.
Good morning.
Hamid,
Yeah.
tell me what you did wrong.
Going for some gourmet cappuccino.
Not bad.
Nothing like a hot drink
No,
on a cold morning.
nothing like caffeine to stave off the caffeine withdrawal headache.
And then we just hit this thing, and it's in the sun, the valley wind's hitting that, you can hit it pretty low and just soar up. Basically the whole flight, the entire flight was ridge soaring.
Nick's struggling with his sim for Dobbo. Dobbo literally got off the plane, jumped on a train, straight up to lodge, and then flew here. Oh, he's changing.
It's just 412 kilobytes, so
Nick is gonna give Dobbo a lesson in how to pack his tent. Is this a race? Who can pack faster?
no, I just got a special way of
That'd be
packing.
like a, I don't know, like an athlete feeding up a toddler or something.
He's trash talking you.
No, I was being humble there. Packing is definitely not my strength.
Do it right. You wrap the pillow around.
So it doesn't damage the ribs in your tent?
Yeah, so it's like an extra protection, and so it's all
That was a
together.
joke nobody got. Does it have nitinol ribs or plastic ones? That's pretty cool, Nick. I'm going to try doing that today with my tent.
Very impressive and efficient, but what I'm just not really sure how it applies to my tent, so perhaps you could demonstrate.
And then afterwards, just to solidify the learning, if you can do mine as well.
You might get organised faster if I just go and start flying in front of you guys. While you
Yeah. Well, we're going to send you first. You're going to test out the air. So these guys are distracting me. I have to go pack up, and I know what's going to happen. They're going to be telling me to rush. But everybody enjoys the videos afterwards. Hemsack looks really happy this morning. He's my friend from last night. Bonjour, Monsieur Chaîne. What are you doing? He's a very hard-working dog. He's taking a break right now from herding his goats. All right, you gotta go do your job. The goats are running away. Alright, we're off again. More hiking. Yay! Not. Oh, yep, Dobbo, what's taking you so long?
Not as strong as the goats.
Wow, look at these views. C'est incroyable. Magnifique. In case you don't know, that's Mont Blanc. Next to it, the Aiguille de Midi.
Not Mont Joli, which is a good sort of
To the right, yeah, of Passy.
thermal. Yeah, so Passy, Mont Blanc, and basically drive right in front of Mont Blanc is
that way down from Mont Blanc.
is Mont
Yeah,
Joli.
Mont Joli.
Which
Nick, what's this place called?
It's called Bonteton.
What does it mean?
It means that if you fly there when you should be flying in the right side of the valley wind, you're going to have a cunt of a time.
Mr. Chion showed up.
Yeah, but yeah, Monsieur Chen and his flock of goats showed up.
Look at that. It's Monsieur Chien bringing his flock of goats. Hey, buddy. Good to see you again.
Outback Luke fame had gotten in touch at some stage, so Nick directed him to the place where he actually meant there's a 45-minute walk from the road, which is the other side of the Aravis. But
Yeah, Nick was really excited to find out Luke's coming over, so he actually hiked back down
the hill.
He left his gear up at the top,
Yeah.
hiked down, and walked back up with Luke. Australian invasion continues. Hey, buddy.
Ride one legend, he carried my pack up here. Fucking Red Bull H-Alps extraordinaire.
And this is when we find about Luke's like crippling fear of like walking on a mildly steep slope. But yeah, but it turns out that, for this guy that's pretty hardcore and like a good pilot and pretty relaxed in the air and stuff. Basically, if you put him on a 45-degree slope,
he's holding on
he loses it. So anyway, I think he was glad that Nick came down to carry his bag up and encourage him up the steep slope essentially.
Wow.
Sorry, Luke, if you're watching, but yeah, I do have some really amusing footage of you struggling on mildly steep strokes. So. Are you having a good time, Luke?
Really, Andrew? It's definitely distracting me from reality.
Good to hear.
We're launching on the sunny side, which was the southeast side of the spine, and it was quite steep and it was grassy. We were waiting for the day to come on because we couldn't see any cues, and so we weren't in a rush.
Launching. Dobbo and I, and I don't know where Luke's got to. Didn't look so good before.
Yeah, I think Nick and I pretty much launched at a similar time and flew together a little bit. And yeah, it was basically like it was like a normal day, wasn't it? Like it wasn't strong wind. Like it was light, near zero wind or very, very light wind, I think.
Nice one, Dobbo. Now it's my turn.
A bit stable and ratty, so to stay up, you kind of had to tuck into the slope at least initially. So yeah, Nick and I both sort of soared the sort of southeast face more or less maintaining, just climbing a little bit of, but basically couldn't get much above launch locally. So I had to sort of tuck around the corner a bit, and eventually got a little scrappy climb out in front. But I found it pretty challenging. It wasn't easy flying. It wasn't big air or anything, or big turbulent, scary air. It was just a little bit ratty and a little bit hard work and a little bit stable, I guess. Nick had a bit of an easier time than me, I think, so he ended up a bit higher, and I think the higher you were, it probably was a bit easier, and then so he pushed on a bit further, but then actually came back, I think, to help you get off the hill, because you were having some struggles. And
Hamid still hasn't launched. What the hell?
Yeah, so I was watching you guys scratch for a while, and you weren't gaining much. So I was just kind of waiting to see you pop up before launching.
Yeah.
So I started setting up to launch, and then by then the wind had completely died. So I tried to do a reverse launch off that, and the slope would be at least 45.
Yeah, it's steep, yeah.
Or more.
Maybe even more, yeah.
Yeah, more than
Yeah,
that.
there's enough that you had to sort of be careful not to fall over where you're...
Yeah, so you get a good foothold.
Yeah.
And it's all grassy, so it's quite slippery as well. So I tried to launch in very light wind, and I pulled the wing. Instead of coming up, it would just slide down the hill. So I went up and I put the wing on top of the bushes to try and get it to stick, hold a bit. But then your lines get caught in the bushes. I told Nick I'm going to launch towards the other side, to the west side, and catch up with you guys later. And I'm thinking in my mind, this is day 2. I'm going to get separated again, and it's going to be another night of hiking. I don't know if I can do it. Pull another night pass. I don't know how many were allowed. But
Sure, Alps, man.
I figure I organize it. I can just give myself lots of night passes. But it's one thing to have night passes, and
Another thing to actually use them.
be able to use them.
Hamid's still trying to launch. Lucas way down the Aravis, and Andrew's starting to get up.
So wind went over the back where everybody else set up to launch, and by the time it was my turn, it's coming over the back. My wing kept sliding down. So Nick suggested I launch from the windy side and then dip into the sunny lee side, which is what I'm going to attempt now. Walked up maybe about 20-30 meters, set up my wing, and it was a pretty nice spot. And I ran down, and there was enough wind coming from the west side that I had a pretty easy launch. And as soon as the wing inflated, rather than going into the wind, I went across, peeled over to the left, and it worked. And Nick had actually, he'd been flying with you, and he got enough height that he was able to come back. So he's talking to me from above. Pretty unlike Nick, because usually when we go into adventures with Nick, you see him at launch, and then you see him when you retrieve him. so yeah, he had come back, and he was helping me launch and
Flying in the spirit of the...
yeah, it was pretty relaxed flying. Nobody was we weren't in a comp. We were just flying for fun, and it was good to have him giving tips, because I don't know, maybe I would have launched on the other side and just bombed out and near Monaco and hike for another 8 hours. That launch worked. I'm now at about almost 2,900 meters, heading towards passing.
I basically didn't really get above the sort of maximum height of the Aravis Ridge, which I guess is a bit over 2,000 meters or something the whole time. Probably a bit of that was just not being willing to sort of commit to get in close, and keeping distance out from the...
It's really rocky there.
Yeah, that's right. It's pretty
intimidating.
Big
Vertical
rock cliffs.
walls,
I got to the north side of the cold Aravis and scratched and just wasn't easy, and then eventually ended up landing sort of north east of the cold Aravis, kind of.
I was lucky. I caught a climb straight away, and I didn't want to be low in there. It was really rocky and didn't look nice. so I got above
Just above
23
hill height,
above ridge height, and went along.
You can see Hamid there, and it's a much harder flight now that we've left it so late, because the wind's starting to push us away and the sun isn't as direct on the face. Next is to cross the Col des Aravis.
And just before I got to the Col des Aravis, I got up to I think 3,000, because I remember waiting for a crackening there. 3,000 meters! Crackening! Woo! And Nick was just ahead of me, so he was a kilometer or so. We had launched on the southeast side.
Yep.
The wind was now from the southwest.
Yep.
And so Nick made the crossing before me. He said it was a pretty easy crossing, so from 3,000 it wasn't a big deal. Crossed over, but I felt it was starting to get, once you got up, it was there were lots of climbs, but it was rough. And I think it was like the previous days where it was quite stable down low. And once you got above a certain point, you're getting pretty good climbs. I thought it was going to be a good day, and but it was rough enough that I was a bit concerned. I've just been trying to pick up any bits of lift that I was getting, and just stay high. And Nick was ahead of me. He was going to fly on the northwest side. And it made sense, and because he said the meteors from there, so we're on the windy and sunny side. The sun had gone over to the west, so that was my plan as well. I was pretty much on top of the spine, but as I got low, my plan was to drop into the west.
So it's gotten pretty shitty. I've gone to the other side of the Aravis. When I was gliding across the coal, it was very buoyant. There's Hammond, nice and high, good. Yeah, but there's quite a lot of wind coming this way, so yeah, just need to climb high and then I should be able to cross over towards Passy.
So I'm just kind of keeping an eye on Nick, roughly where he is, but not particularly. Like every so often I'd see him. By this time, Nick had dropped down quite a bit into the west side, and he was above the spine, and I saw his red wing, and just as I was turning, I saw it do the typical
Wobble.
thing, wobble that it does. It was like the left side first and then the right, and I couldn't see a lot of detail, but I could tell that there's something wrong, and it's going into this cascade type thing. And next thing I know, the wing just went just really fast, almost like a spin, and
So
very
was his-
tight.
Was his,
Like a
was his,
sat almost, or like what are you
Really
talking
tight
about?
spiral, I would say.
was his
Yeah.
body quite horizontal and?
No,
and
I measured afterwards. I was about 1.6 a mile away.
yeah, okay. It's quite a
So
distance.
I could get a sense of what was happening, but I couldn't pick out details.
So basically
I-
going fast down and
Really fast down, and that was my first thought was,
spiral or something.
yeah, and he's got to throw his reserve,
Yeah.
and it didn't take him long, and he threw his reserve. I saw the reserve come out,
Yeah.
and I saw it open up, and then just lay on the ground, and he suddenly stopped at the same time. And in looking at that, he was turning so fast, and the stop was so sudden that I didn't think anybody could survive that. And at first it was the first thought was that this is not real. It's not happening. It's just the stuff you see in, it's a YouTube video or something. Where we've seen so many auto rotations and stuff. And then you realize this is actually happening. It's real, and
So, like,
So
what did you do next?
Yeah, at that stage.
I think it was like-
the wing. The wing was set on the mountain. Was it above him or below him? And what was his body position like? And where was he relative to the edge
So
of the
I
mountain?
remember looking at him. He was down there. His reserve had come out. It was again in that direction. I think it was a yellow reserve, and his wing was spread out to about 90 degrees to the right. And I remember it being spread out. And so my first thought was that I had Zello, and like I asked Nick, "Are you okay?" And there was no response. And it was.
What was going through your mind at that point?
Like I said, I didn't think he survived. I thought he was dead. And
And so you
And
just
when
trying to
he didn't-
establish comms with him. And so
What-
but from that time that he impacted to the time he pressed the Zello button, how many was that seconds? Do you think?
It was think like you think pretty quick. Then there's all these thoughts going through your head. But I think I went to Zello pretty much right away.
Right.
And
And you were trying to control your own glider at the same time. And was
Yeah,
there,
I mean,
was there
there
any
was-
other pilots around you at the time, or were you pretty much?
no, we were just there by ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah. So when he didn't respond in Zello, like, I'm trying to figure out what I need to do. And the first thing was to I figured I'm gonna hit the SOS on my
InReach.
InReach. So I did that.
So when you press just for people who don't understand what the InReach system does, can give a little bit.
Yeah,
of
so
background.
it's a satellite messenger and also a satellite safety beacon, I guess, SOS device. So popped the thing on the side, held it down. I'd never done it before. So that came on. As soon as I got confirmation that it's transmitting, then I got on the phone, dialed the emergency number. And the interesting thing is that I'd been flying there for a few days before that, and most of the times I was flying on my own in places I wasn't familiar with. And one day I landed and I realized that I didn't know the local emergency number, and it's not 000, it's not 911, and I actually had looked it up and it was 112, so for France, and thankfully I knew what it was. So I hit that 112, and there's a French person on the other end, and they spoke a little bit of English, but they were able to get a native English speaker pretty quickly. As I was hitting the InReach, I started flying towards Nick, and I'm looking down, and so at one point I was pretty close to above where he was, but I still couldn't quite see. There was no movement, and the wings and the reserve were spread out, and I couldn't tell. Like, the terrain looked really rocky, and but I had no idea how steep it was. And
We've got some like footage of when we
Yeah.
walked in to get his gear. So yeah, it's pretty. There is some like grassy slope around, but a lot of it's rocky and cliffy and stuff, and you know,
Yeah.
at best sort of steep scrambling and at worst climbing kind of thing.
someone asked me if I'd like considered landing there, and it didn't even cross my mind, because after seeing Nick go down so violently, I was just I was waiting for it to hit me, whatever it was that got hit, and because I'm flying in that same direction, I've got the lightness has the windshield in front of it, and my phone was on the deck, so I was able to put the talk on the speakerphone and still be flying, and it because it protects the phone from the noise. It's actually quite usable. So while I'm on the emergency, talking to the emergency guys, they wanted coordinates and stuff, and I'm telling them I'm near the Aravis. I have no idea where in the Aravis I am, so I'm trying on the map, trying to zoom in and trying to figure out the locations, and I can't pronounce most of the names that are popping up. And
France.
yeah, I'm in the RV. What more do you want to know? Middle of the RV, past the call, or it was just. And then they were asking for coordinates. So I was able to use Squiggly and pulled it up, and it pulls up Google Maps, and then from there picked out the coordinates, and I'm telling them the coordinates, and I didn't know whether they wanted, because coordinates can be in different formats as well. And while this is happening, I start getting calls from InReach. So they're trying to call me, and I'm starting to get calls from Edge, and I'm on this thing, and I'm declining all the calls. So, because I figured if InReach is not able to reach me, they'll assume that I definitely need help. It's not a
not a drill.
So I didn't respond to that. I stayed with the emergency guys, and at one point the French emergency response started getting calls from InReach. So they then assured me, okay, we've got another. They didn't tell me it was InReach, by the way. They said we've got another report coming in, so we know exactly where he is.
Yeah.
And I'd seen reserves in the few days I was there. I saw 2 reserves, and so I'm thinking
Could be something else.
Yeah. Is it actually Nick that they've got? Is this another accident that being reported? So
how are you describing it? Like wind colour and stuff like that?
no, I said I'm going to stay with you, and I'll confirm my coordinates, and you need to tell me where he is. I didn't know what, but I wanted to make sure that it was
pretty much over the top of where Nick was at this point.
No, so I got to the top of him, and then rough air. I'm just trying to fly away from it. There's no thermal, so I can't. So I slowly was coming down, and I'm starting to pick my landing suit because I'm at the intersection of two valleys. So there's a deeper valley, and then to the left, there's another valley that comes up and then drops down into this. I'd never flown there before, so I didn't know where I should be landing. So I'm thinking I need to land at the highest spot and probably have the best phone reception.
The golf course was a pretty good bet.
Yeah, that sounds like I'm going for that golf course. But it's the middle of the day, and I haven't flown that. I've only flown there a few days, and I'd never landed in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking I don't want to get hammered by valley wind. But turned out it was pretty calm when I landed, and rescue people were confident that they had the right coordinates, and they told me that the chopper was in the air. So then so all this time after the initial call to Nick, I hadn't had a chance to call him again. So I got back on, and I said, I told Nick that the rescue was on the way, and honestly I wasn't expecting a response, and then I hung up, and I'm landed, and it's such a weird feeling. You're just in this beautiful place, golf course, beautiful day, and there's these tourists around. They're so curious about where you've come from. They're asking you questions, and you're trying not to be rude, and you know, and there's messages popping up about helicopters going, and the friends in Australia that were tracking our message group. So I think as soon as it landed, I gave you a call.
Basically got the bad news from you, and soon after that I ran into Baptiste. He was kind enough to sort of offer us a lift, so we walked together, and basically we tried to hitch to his car, and some stage I managed to get a call into Nick, and he answered basically, and
and all of a sudden the Zello crackled up, and it was Nick, and it was such a relief, and just to hear.
What was the timeline? So from the time that accident happened, it was like a 20-minute gap.
It was about 20 minutes.
Of you saying, "Hey, Nick, you okay?" And there was radio silence, and then so you were still coming down at this point. You landed underneath where he was. And,
I was a couple of spurs over.
And packing up, and then the Zello came in, did it?
Yeah, the Zello came on, and I couldn't believe it. And he's Nick, and he said something about. He was unconscious for a while, obviously, and then I misheard him. I thought he said that he's going to find a suitable place to launch. Like, no, don't launch. There's a rescue chopper on the way.
But that wasn't what was on the Zello, was it?
No, that's not what he said. But maybe that's what I expected Nick to say. So I made it up, but it sounded like he said that he's gonna launch. But what he was saying was that I listened to the Zello afterwards. He said he's gonna get his legs out of the risers, and he's gonna find somewhere sensible to stand or something. And then he asked. He said something about. He said, "I heard something about a rescue and a chopper. Do I need to disconnect my?" You need to get rid of your disconnect your reserve and your wing. And he was quite coherent at the time, making sense. And I didn't realize at the time, but there was by then the chopper guys were there, and I could later when I'm listening to it, I can hear some voices in the back and helicopter noise as well. So he was sounding pretty good to me.
I think I called him on Facebook at 1:54, I think, and at that stage, he'd said he again sounded pretty coherent to me. Like, I didn't stay on the phone very long because I knew the helicopter was somewhere in the vicinity. He seemed to be making sense. I think he even said that from memory, he said that he can move his arms and legs at that stage. At 154, whether he actually could or not, or or whether he was a bit confused, I don't know. But yeah, that was 154, I think.
Yeah. So then his last Zello call was really weird. It was a few minutes later.
Yeah.
And at that time, I couldn't quite make out what he said, and it sounded like nonsense, like coconut husks and stuff. And if you didn't pay attention to, if you weren't listening, it sounded like he's speaking English, and it was words
it was properly nonsense.
Gibberish,
so that was 159, and when I heard that, I was really worried, because I think in retrospect what probably happened was that the med team had gotten to him and given him some ketamine or something similar, and he was sort of semi-dissociated and confused. That's probably the best fit.
Yeah.
But I was really worried at that stage, because he'd been so coherent before, and we knew he was unconscious for a while, and he'd been so coherent when he spoke to us, and then to be worse, that sort of can be a bad sign. It can mean you're getting worse bleeding in your head and that sort of stuff, So that, at the time, made me really worried, but I think that probably was just confusion from meds.
Yeah.
So I don't think we know exactly what he got given, but to me it sounded like could have been someone who'd had a bit of ketamine for pain,
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is Nick was enjoying himself and maybe having dreams of coconut husks. That's what he said. And by this time, I'm like, so I'm feeling pretty relieved after this, because all this time we haven't heard from him, and then all of a sudden he comes back to life, and he's making sense, and I figure whatever kind of injury it is, it can't be too bad. Chopper noise went away, so we could tell when it landed. And then I saw it going away, and on Squiggly we could see Nick's phone was tracking still.
All right.
So we could see when the chopper was flying overhead, and I could tell that he's in that chopper.
Yeah, speed.
Or at least his phone is.
Yeah, his phone is. That'd be the most valuable thing in this pack.
So Nick wanted to ask, do you have any comments about any contributing risk factors to the accident? And it's a bit of an open question, but I guess it could mean, in your opinion, do you think he was too low considering the change? And you're saying it's getting spicier, higher than where you were, or was there difference in meteo at that point?
I mean, I've thought about that a lot. I think one of the kind of annoying things about this accident was a benign day. It was not a day that you'd think this is not the right day for flying. It was scratchy and a bit shitty and stable, but the wind wasn't strong. Thermals weren't crazy. We wasn't in a crazy place. So I think that whatever happened, was within the bounds of basically normal thermal turbulence. I don't think there's anything else that sort of could have triggered it.
And it sounded like you witnessing it, even though you witnessed it, you were far enough away that it was visible that something occurred. It could have been overcorrection, or it could have been just the attributes of the wing that caused it, but it was probably too far away to really get a full understanding from it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell what. I mean, I couldn't see the configuration of the wing. I couldn't see if there was a tip cravated in or whatever. I just remember seeing it spin really fast and go down.
Probably likely to end up in a sort of auto rotation very quickly, isn't it? But not. I guess it's not impossible to have a big asymmetric recovery that ends up in spiral. I guess contributing stuff. I mean, he's flying an E&D wing, and he's probably flying on the top of the weight range, if not a bit over. So I guess that sort of makes things a bit more spicy if things go wrong. I don't know. Maybe he's a bit too relaxed. Because it was such because it was such a it was a pretty benign day, a particularly benign day for the stuff that he's used to flying in. For some reason he seems to be a bit of a masochist and sort of punishing himself in windy, shitty conditions. It wasn't that, was it? So he was maybe a bit relaxed. And
those are my thoughts as well. And Nick's used to flying in a lot worse conditions. And just the day before, he had sent us a message, and the message started off saying, "I'm all right," but there was some down valley wind, and I couldn't even figure out what he was trying to say. But it was for him to be. He sounded a bit rattled a little bit, and he just wanted to send out a message saying he's all right. But apparently, he was when he was flying up to Tennessee, he was in
some pretty gnarly conditions compared
and so I agree. I think maybe he was a bit too relaxed. For me, this whole mountain flying was new. At
not
that
relaxing,
point. Not
is it?
anymore, but I've flown around Mont Blanc, if you don't know. But back then,
Everybody knows.
this is before Mont Blanc. And so I was taking it pretty easy, and I was trying to catch every bit of bit of lift that I was getting. I didn't want to get low, and Nick was more confident. He went down, and he was my only the thing I would say.
Maybe a video or something with his hands
it's
off
possible
the
because he doesn't remember the last.
Yeah.
His hands may not have been.
Well, I suspect if he was close to the ground, he probably wouldn't. He's not
maybe
silly, you know. But
But there was one thing, even from looking at the pictures too, and looking at the maps afterwards. There is that huge boulder or like little hill in front of and downwind of where he was at.
It's not like it's in front of, like he's not flying in behind it.
No.
But the hill's coming up and there's a knob on it, and then he's sort of up here. Kind of,
And so the only thing I can think of, there's some really shitty bit of air that caused, but it's just speculation. And
it wouldn't have been anywhere that I wouldn't have flown, I don't think.
no, and they take students there. They do
Yeah.
XC flights off it. It's not.
It's a normal place,
Yeah,
basically, to fly.
It was just a lot of bad luck, I think, and that was the scary bit too. And I talked to people afterwards, and people here in Australia, and even there, everybody was pretty shaken up. And, Nick's got a lot of friends, and everybody starts questioning themselves. If an accident like this can happen to Nick, what chance do the average recreational pilot have? And a lot of times you can justify it saying, he's flying in the H-Alps, he's flying in conditions I would never put myself into and stuff. Or when it's on a day where
there was no reason. There was no reason not to be
benign, and then you just gotta accept that sometimes things will go to shit on a day that you least expect, and it's just some randomness in this sport that we don't understand. And
I think there's heaps and heaps of modifiable risk in paragliding, isn't there? But there is a bit of unmodifiable risk that you can you can do your best to control, but it's not a risk-free sport, no matter how conservative you are, I guess, which is tricky. It's it had me thinking a lot about risk and reward, and particularly for the rest of the trip, really. Not so much in the air. Mostly I was feeling okay in the air, but often leading up to the flight, I'm thinking, is it worth it, and we're getting out of it. Anyway, I had some good flights for the rest of the trip.
I don't think it's unusual for a scenario that's like this, even for a pilot who was in control of the glider at the time. And you read about it all the time. People, post on paragliding forum or whatever and say, "Hey, this is the video happened," but I don't understand why. But in this particular instance, Nick probably could have unpacked it if he remembered it. But we're probably going to have a lot of still this mystery, a part of it, because just what occurred. So listen, let's move on a little bit and talk a little bit about we're now heading to the hospital. So you've got Nick's on his way. He's being taken care of by paramedics. He's in the chopper. You're in contact with Dobbo. You guys realise that this is a pretty serious situation, and you've got to get to the hospital, and so you're on your way. What conversations were you guys having when you?
Well, Baptiste
was
was really helpful.
So he came in.
Yeah, these guys came over, picked me up, and honestly, I was feeling pretty relaxed at that time, because the last thing in my mind was it was such a contrast to what I thought had happened to. Nick was fine. He was he was talking, and I just thought it's a bad injury, but he's going to be okay.
Yep.
The one niggle in my head was that last message that we got from him, which was pretty confused. And I guess at the time I thought, oh gee, he's probably got a bad head injury and he's getting worse. So I was nervous that it could be pretty bad actually when we got to hospital.
I remember that.
But I wasn't worried about his spine because so much, because he'd actually told us, arms and legs are moving okay. I think in that message, which so I guess it was, we drove in, and then basically we
Dobbo was using his broken French to good use. And,
So
But
you,
it
you can,
worked
you can do
effective.
more than just order cheese.
Cheese and beer, and also tell people that I'm the friend of Nick Neynens. But you got to say Nicolas Neynens. If you say Nick Neynens, I don't know who it is. We got there, probably an hour or more after Nick would have arrived in the hospital. So he'd already been there for a while. So we never saw the paramedics or the helicopter crew or anything. So he was in the emergency at the time that we met him. And basically I got a second-hand story from one of the doctors there that he'd obviously had a paragliding crash, and I got some broken English-French story that they thought that he'd had a second fall during the rescue, and it wasn't exactly clear to me. It sort of implied that maybe it might have fallen during the rescue, but I think that probably was just a crap interpretation of the broken conversation.
yeah, I remember her saying the helicopter interfered with the wing.
Yeah.
And there were some terms that she was using, and they told us at that time that the paramedics thought that he had pelvis injuries, back injuries, and head injuries. And then later on, and then Dobbo explained to them that he's an emergency doctor, so they started giving us a bit more information.
So basically, Andrew arrived at the hospital and did the "Do you know who I am?" speech to the doctors. Look at my credentials.
Well, it
Dr.
was helpful in some ways. So they let us in, and I got to see Nick at that stage. And basically, when he saw him, he was pretty confused and groggy. And basically, at that stage, he had no motor function in his legs. So at that stage, he wasn't moving his legs at all.
And so next question is really about if he hadn't got rescued, based on what you understand at that point, what would be the risk to him?
Well, he was never walking himself off the mountain. So if he didn't get rescued, he'd stay there. Basically, I think. So I think the injuries, he had a number of pretty significant injuries, and I guess he walked him through the body. So he had a pretty good head injury. And the scan that he had when he arrived in hospital showed a fair bit of blood. So he had some subdural hemorrhage, some subarachnoid hemorrhage, and some intraparenchymal hemorrhage.
What did the helmet look like? What was the break on the helmet?
Yeah, the helmet was pretty
Bashed up
dinged
all
up.
around.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Really?
It wasn't.
Yeah, but the
100%.
front had a big dent in
It
it.
wasn't 100% obvious to me where exactly the impact would have been. He had blood on both sides of his brain, but basically he'd got a good whack. But nothing that needed intervention there, so probably would have gotten better. But he was pretty confused for a period of time, I think, in hospital, which probably is a result of his head injury. But that sort of got better over probably a week or two, basically. And after a couple of weeks, he's more or less superficially, at least, back to his normal self there. So it's a minor sort of bruising on the lungs, pulmonary contusions, but that wasn't bad enough that he even needed oxygen or anything. His obviously his main injury was an L1 fracture, which was unstable and basically had bone pushing on the spinal cord. And by the time I'd seen him in the hospital and he'd had his scans and stuff, he wasn't using his legs at all. And then working down, he had some bleeding into the belly, but nothing that required an operation. So he had some bleeding into his adrenal gland and around his liver, essentially. And all those things, like the bleeding into the brain, the bruising on the lungs, and the bleeding into the belly, they can get worse to the point where you need specific treatment, like resuscitation operations, oxygen for the lungs, operations on the head. But basically, none of them did progress. So the only injury that required any specific treatment was the back. So I guess if he wasn't, the hypothetical, what happens if he's not rescued? I think he basically, spends a
Cold night up on the hill.
Yeah, uncomfortable night on the hill, essentially. Potentially, I guess if he gets, if he gets really cold over the next few hours, and maybe his bleeding gets worse, and potentially that's something that could have been life-threatening. I guess that's probably pretty realistic. If he got hypothermic as well, then your blood doesn't clot, and some of the other places that were bleeding would have gotten worse. So it'd be, possible maybe that he'd survive a night out there, but it would have been bad for him.
If you went flying with him, and specifically if Hammond hadn't witnessed it, what do you reckon would be the timeline for discovery, or him? Did he have a spot or a?
Yeah, he did have a spot.
Yeah, following my brother's spot, I think.
So there was two activations, wasn't there? There's one that he did. Is that right?
No, he never activated the spot.
Right, okay.
for my brother's spot. Yeah, so yeah, I guess like basically it would have come down to when someone noticed him, like, oh, he probably would have become conscious and activated his spot probably
Yeah.
at a similar time to when
Yeah,
he
when-
talked to Harmad and Harmad told him that the helicopter was on the way. I would have thought. There's a chance I think he was certainly confused, but probably to hear it enough that he would have managed that.
Realising you did.
Could have easily been that he was too confused for that though. You know, if the head injury is a bit worse or whatever. So.
I was really surprised at how few physical or external injuries that visual injuries he had.
Yeah, a bit of a
So
scratch on the face.
I saw him go down really hard,
Yeah.
and I've just been looking at the pictures of the spot that you guys took afterwards when you went to retrieve the gear. I think maybe he didn't hit the ground initially. This is my opinion. I think because the wings stopped so suddenly from the rotation, and on that rocky slope, it's just really hard to believe that he has no injuries like to his legs, like his legs are not broken, or there's no big gashes and scratches and stuff on his legs, lower extremities. Maybe, so I'm thinking that there was that boulder, his wing actually got snagged in that, and he swung underneath it, head bashed against the rock, and then maybe he was hanging from that position. Then he fell again.
Yeah, be really good because I think from what we understand, the Hilo guys saw him in a precarious position and saw him have a second fall. So it'd be really interesting to hear what they said. So possibly he's hung up on the side of a bit of a cliff or something. I don't really know at this stage. I guess it depends on how you hit the ground, what you injure. Like he certainly had pretty good going injuries. Like, you know, he's broken his back, he's bleeding into his belly, he's bleeding into his head. So he's definitely hit the ground with force. You know, like.
Yeah, but I still thought, I'm not wishing more injuries on him, but I just
Bounces well.
I guess it depends how you land, doesn't it? Like if you land like that, then you're not on your legs.
yeah.
Probably not going to break your arms and legs and stuff. But yeah, he could easily have had much more injury. He could have easily been dead, basically, couldn't he? He wouldn't have taken much, I guess. But.
The next few days is a real kind of blur for Nick. And he doesn't remember anything from like 10 minutes before the crash until he says 2 or 3 days after the crash occurred. During that stage, you know, that time, you know, how were you guys coping, and you know what was going through your minds during that time?
I've never seen Dobbo so rattled before. He's pretty stoic, and he deals with this kind of shit all the time. And but this was he's a friend, and it was.
And I think you described it well before. We put Nick up on this pedestal because, you know, he's the H-Alps pilot, and he's very talented, and although he pushes the limits.
I have the advantage of knowing him well, so I don't put him up.
You've seen him make enough mistakes. But yeah, it's been
I don't know. Yeah, it was pretty it was sad. Obviously, I guess I probably was I sort of knew the implications of the injury he had at the time, and I think that so it probably led to a more pessimistic outlook than maybe some of you guys had.
I was I just wanted you to give us some hope, and you were really pessimistic and realistic, and we just wanted to hear some good news, and you didn't give us any. So that was a bit
bad news.
Yeah, that was really disappointing, and
sorry to let you down.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it was pretty shitty, and then what do you do after that? There's nothing more we could do. He was being taken care of in the hospital, and Nick, Dobbo had to call Nick's family, and that was pretty tough. And he did a really good job, and I've always respected you, but
His bedside
I was just
manner
and it was a bit harsh, but but no, it was, and for Nick too, it was he couldn't have had a better friend to be flying with, because he would have been taken care of, but for Nick to be able to come back as quickly as he did, back to Australia and now to New Zealand, getting the treatment he wants, would have been a lot more difficult if he was there by himself.
Yeah.
Because That's a
I
whole.
reckon Karen would have smuggled him onto a plane or
Yeah.
taken him out of there.
But for us afterwards too, it's the obvious thing is you think you're scared of flying yourself. But once you get in the air, it's pretty much automatic. And but then you're very sensitive to any bit of turbulence that you hit, and but also you don't really know if you should be having fun.
Yeah,
Your
there's a
friends
bit
in
of
the
sort of guilt
hospital
or
and-
whatever. Yeah.
And then what else are you going to do there? Like you
That was Nick. That was Nick talking to you guys about your kind of dream holiday and what you should be doing. Was he supportive of you going out and
Oh yeah, I think he.
Oh yeah, he was
he's
giving us
pragmatic or
weather.
whatever, yeah. But I think, I mean, initially, like first few days, he was pretty confused,
Yeah, he did,
basically.
yeah.
So
Every
I
time
think
you met
like,
him, you started again.
Start again, basically, for the first little while, and then yeah, eventually, I think he was just sick of people visiting him, basically.
was he?
He'd
Oh,
rather-
you know what? There's,
Unless you
I
bring
was
the
really
beer, don't come in.
So one of the most surprising things for me was how many girlfriends he had. There's this constant stream of apparent constant stream.
We only met two, didn't you?
Yeah, but it just sounds more dramatic. When I saw it, it was like one after the other. So
Yeah.
for me, it felt
And for Alina, these are past girlfriends, not current girlfriends. Yeah, but you met as well.
allegedly. Yeah, but I remember one day she called Nick up and got some advice on where to fly and stuff. But he wasn't 100%, but he was still doing weather forecasting on the automatic. He doesn't need a lot of his active brain, I think, to do that.
And yeah, mostly for me, it was more about I'd just be less sort of excited about the build up to flying and stuff. In the air, it was still okay, but I'd sort of be thinking more about sort of risk benefit and stuff.
Yeah,
Leading up to flying, I guess.
I was definitely a lot more cautious about flying above the tree line because until this incident, I always viewed the trees as nuisances, and they because we've got so many trees here in Australia, we can't find launches or landings.
But now you've learned that trees are nature's airbags.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Whenever I didn't have trees below me, I realized I was in the danger zone. And
So short term, there was obviously a little bit of a mental shift around risk, and do you think that it's played out more permanent for you and long term? Do you see that this sort of this incident you've been involved with, does that change your perspective a little bit?
Don't know. We'll have to see, I guess. I haven't flown really. Like, I've just had a couple of little coastal flights since I've come back from France, but I haven't had a proper XC flight.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of flights, but ironically, after having so many good flights in the Alps, I come back and I've had some really shitty ones. Everybody else seems to be flying a lot better than me. So I don't know. Maybe there's something there that I'm not. I don't realize it.
You just don't, unless it's 5 meters a second up, you don't
Yeah,
have anymore, basically.
that may be it. Yeah, I'm used to those 8-meter climbs that I got once.
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of the natural wrap up of the talk about it. Anything else you guys want to mention before we close the interview?
Did Harmon mention about how we flew around?
Oh my god!
We can't talk about it if we haven't.
Oh my god!
Yeah, I just say that Nick's a pretty impressive guy. It's just, even before this, but just to see him take this on as a challenge. The other update that he posted the other day, and I was watching it. We were watching it together.
Yeah.
And it was ridiculous. He's talking about doing wheelies on his wheelchair, and there's one point he's talking about the ballast point, and it almost sounded like he was explaining some SIV maneuver or something. And he's just treating this as a challenge, and he just seems just as bright and cheerful as he always is. And I don't know how you do that, but
Sensible, pragmatic person, isn't he? So,
yeah. So that's pretty impressive.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you making time to do this for Nick, and it's
In front of the palms.
and the possum flipping crashing around on the shed in the background.
Next time, can you please arrange for 2 ferns,
Yeah.
one on each side?